Around that area there was a river, and the zone was full of trees where, according to my grandfather, people who committed terrible crimes at the beginning of the last century were hanged. Since we were little, my sister and I remember that very strange things happened to us. Some of them I'm going to tell you in a future email, although I think I won't have enough time to tell you all of them. In the house we were scared in inexplicable ways. The furniture and certain decorations would crack and break out of nowhere, as if someone had thrown a firecracker inside the house. Even our little dog would fly out as if something invisible was picking her up and throwing her into the air, and poor thing, terrified, would always run to hide under some piece of furniture. Another unexplainable situation, which I'm going to tell you today, happened in the bathroom every day before we left the house to go to school. We would lock all the doors and windows for safety, since my mom had a business in a nearby town and the house was empty all day. When we finished school, my dad would pick us up and we would go to my mom's shop. When night came, we would return home, but every time we went to the bathroom, we would always find it dirty with black feces as if someone had used it and didn't flush. At first, we didn't pay much attention to it, but over time it became a regular occurrence. My dad, already very upset, would scold my sister and me, "You're filthy, why don't you flush the toilet?" Obviously we hadn't been there. The situation repeated so many times that one day my mom, tired of my dad getting mad at us, told him, "Instead of scolding the girls, check if the bathroom is clean before you leave the house." And so it happened. My dad checked, and yes, the bathroom was spotless when we left. But at night when we returned, my mom asked him to check again, and to his surprise the bathroom was dirty. My parents checked the doors and windows, but everything was locked securely. There was no explanation for how it happened. Days passed until one night at 3 in the morning my dad couldn't sleep. His room was right in front of the bathroom door and something caught his attention. Something was moving. When he looked outside, he saw a man, half naked as he described him, with a towel tied around his waist and curly hair. The man entered the bathroom, but the most terrifying thing is that he didn't open the door, he simply passed through it like a. While my dad, astonished and scared, woke up my mom and said, I know who is dirtying the bathroom." My mom, surprised, didn't know whether to believe him or think he had just had a nightmare. My dad was always very skeptical, but from that day on he began to believe in inexplicable things. Months later, someone came to clean the house with candles and quartz because from that moment on, many really strange and paranormal things started happening. I'll tell you more about that later. For now, thank you so much for reading and have a lovely night. Good evening to the whole community. It's a pleasure for me to return to your ears with some of the most terrifying, most impactful stories that you, the community, have sent us, and that today take us to a military school that seems to hide many entities, many stories, some hard to believe of course because that's how ghost stories are. Remember that we all believe up to the point where our experiences allow us. It's hard to believe in things we haven't yet lived through. What seems out of our reality, but that's how it all starts, and many end up being the protagonists of this program. So be careful and let yourself be carried away by the following stories, but with caution. On this occasion, I want to share some stories that not only remained as tales among cadets but that I had the opportunity to experience firsthand. To begin with, before I enlisted as a cadet, I did my military service in a unit whose name and location I prefer not to mention. During that time, there were 2 sergeants in particular who used to assign us daily activities, including military values checks and other similar instructions. I mention this because it's important to remember some things they would often say. No guys, they would really say, in this world there are many things for which you can't find an explanation, and here in the Army we experience things that, as you say, seem from beyond. Even those who don't believe in these things end up believing because here you experience it firsthand. Words more, words less. Both sergeants agreed on this idea. After their warnings, they would tell us their own paranormal experiences and encounters that happened during operations or within the regiment itself, and here is where my story begins. Up until that moment, I was always skeptical about the paranormal. Although very close people had shared their experiences, I could never fully believe them, or at least I didn't give them the importance of a completely real event. They seemed exaggerated or, at best. However, everything changed when I finished my military service and enlisted as a cadet at the heroic military college. I enlisted on September 1, 2017. Like all rookie cadets, I was expecting to be assigned to a company where I would spend the next 4 years with my antiguos, older colleagues, as we call them in the Army. Along with about 200 other cadets, we waited for instructions when the older cadets arrived to divide us. Once I was assigned a place to stay, all that was left was to integrate into a platoon when my platoon sergeant arrived. He greeted us with a few words, and the last thing he said caught me off guard. A lot of things happen here, and even though they aren't recent, they are still part of this school. If you don't believe, it's better that you start doing so, and I'm not talking about religious matters, I'm talking about believing in what you're seeing. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I would come to understand it later. A few weeks later, the earthquake on September 19 struck and devastated much of the country's center, and the structure of the school also suffered damage, so we were ordered to evacuate the companies and set up camp on the main square. During those nights, I had my first interactions with the second-year cadets. During one of the informal talks, one of them commented on something that reinforced what the sergeant had said on the first day. If you haven't had a paranormal encounter by now, you will have at least one here, believe me. What kind of things? I asked now with curiosity. A third-year cadet who was listening to the conversation intervened. If you really want to know, I'll tell you about the potro boleador, polishing horse, and the guard duty change. He motioned for us to come closer and lowered his voice. Years ago, when the school still had the old customs, there was an extreme discipline, really. The new cadets were trained through beatings even without reason. That was the system. He paused. A first-year cadet, a potro, had only been here for 6 months. One night, his sergeant conducted a polishing inspection, and his mistake was not having polished his boots well. A terrible mistake. An uncomfortable silence spread among us. His sergeant dragged him to the bathrooms, and there, he gave him such a beating that it ended up killing him. And every time he hit him, he screamed, "So you learned to polish your boots well, potro, so you learned to do it right?" And I tell you this because there's a good chance you might see him at some point. A chill ran down my spine, but without losing focus I said, "I don't know, Sergeant, I don't doubt your word, but I've never experienced anything like that. I've never seen anything strange around here." "Ah, potro," he replied with a smile. "When it happens to you, you'll remember me, I promise you that." I didn't give it much importance, but weeks later, everything changed. By October we had already returned to our routines. Cleaning, standing guard, fixing uniforms, and, of course, polishing our boots. It was almost 12 a.m. on a Thursday. I had stayed up studying for an evaluation, and when I realized the time, I went downstairs to iron my uniform. I went to the back of the bathrooms where I usually polished my boots and plugged in my iron. To avoid bothering anyone, I put on my headphones and turned on the iron, waiting for it to heat up. Then I noticed something, a figure moving between the sinks. At first I thought it was someone wanting to ask me something, but suddenly it felt like the air turned cold, a dry, intense cold that chilled me to the bone. My body reacted before my mind. Something inside me told me this wasn't normal. The figure moved to the end of the hallway, and then I saw it clearly. It was a cadet, white t-shirt, black shorts, barefoot. He sat with difficulty against the wall as if his body hurt. I looked at his boots. They were different from ours, and that was completely impossible. I don't know how or why, but I dared to speak to him in a low voice. "You didn't polish your boots either?" His response froze my blood.